There are certain places that just truly don't feel real. Places I dream of visiting for years and years, and then when I'm finally there, my mind can't comprehend the fact that my wildest fantasies have actually come true. Places that I envision as the most beautiful landscapes on Earth. But then the reality of the situation is even more magnificent than I ever could have imagined. Out of every place I've visited that truly changed my perception of beauty, one stands far above them all. The icy continent, the end of the world, Antarctica. There is no better welcome to Antarctica than watching sunset while sailing through the Lemaire Channel, a stunning and intimidating passage between some very impressive mountains. It's honestly hard to imagine navigating a channel like this back in the day in a wooden boat without depth finders, GPS, or even weather reports. Every single passenger on our boat was outside on the deck to witness this jaw-dropping location, perhaps one of the most beautiful areas in Antarctica. The weather was stormy and cold, but the scenery was truly incredible, so we spent several hours watching some of the most photogenic glaciers and peaks in the world as we floated by. The next morning, we awoke to find ourselves at Brown Station, located in Paradise Bay. In a place as magnificent as Antarctica, it seems a little silly, perhaps even redundant to use the word paradise in a name, but truly this is one of the most incredible locations I've ever laid eyes on. Towering peaks of igneous rocks, draped in sparkling glaciers, surrounding pristine water full of wildlife. A backdrop that felt downright surreal as we boarded the Zodiacs to head into land. This was our first time actually setting foot on the mainland of Antarctica, and so we took a few moments to be full-blown tourists and really make sure to appreciate how danged cool it is to actually stand on the continent of Antarctica. The crew informed us that there was a short hike available to a high overlook above the bay, and of course we wanted to take advantage of that. Hiking in the giant muck boots wasn't easy, but the payoff was incredibly worth it, as the view from the top was absolutely jaw-dropping. We spent a few minutes watching the Zodiacs coming off the ship, and then I set up my tripod and filmed the time-lapse that made the opening sequence for this video. After the hike, we loaded into Zodiacs to head back to the boat, which turned out to be an amazing sightseeing opportunity, but we had very little photographic success due to the choppy waters and high wind. However, we did get to have some fun watching penguins lose their footing and accidentally slide into the ocean. Our afternoon was spent at Truant Island in some of the nicest weather for the entire trip. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record calling every location stunningly beautiful, but I am seriously at a loss for words at how every single square inch of the Antarctic Peninsula ranks in the top 10 for the most incredible landscapes I've ever seen. At Truant Island, we had a fairly lengthy hike up to a rookery on a cliff, and the hike was absolutely worth it as we got to spend several hours watching a colony of Gen 2 penguins play and socialize in the sun. This was also our first time seeing skuas. I initially thought they were just another seabird hanging out on land, but the guides informed us that they are here very intentionally because, as sad as it sounds, penguin eggs and chicks are one of their primary food sources. On our Zodiac ride back to the boat, we found a group of Weddell seals sunning themselves on the rocks. This is hardly a rare sighting, as Weddell seals are the second most abundant seal species in Antarctica, with their range covering the entire circumference of Antarctic coastline. But these adorable little dog mermaids can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 1,300 pounds. That evening was perhaps my favorite night of the entire trip, as we got to check off an absolute bucket list item on the itinerary. We were going to go camping on the Antarctic ice and sleep under the open sky on the 7th continent. In order to truly experience Antarctic wilderness, we skipped the tents and instead dug a flat spot directly into the snowpack so we could sleep completely exposed to fresh air under the Antarctic sky.
I'm stuck.
It's understandably tough to sleep under a sky that never gets dark, especially when surrounded by beauty like this, so we spent most of the night watching clouds and icebergs alike drift past us, interspersed with the occasional penguin and curious Weddell seal. As the twilight turned to day, we packed up our camps and began shuttling back to the ship. The overcast skies of the previous evening had cleared to a beautiful morning sun with remarkably calm water, just a frosty Garden of Eden. With the rest of the boat still asleep, the Sea Spirit made her way through mirror-calm waters in the Gerlach Strait. The entire boat was asleep for this passage except for the 8 of us awake and outside. This was truly one of the most beautiful mornings anyone could have ever imagined, and we had it all to ourselves. At one point, we passed by perhaps the most picturesque mountain I've ever seen, with smooth, glassy water, and I captured what might very well be my favorite landscape photo from the entire trip. We spent the morning exploring the largest, loudest, and stinkiest penguin colony we've seen so far. There were significantly more skuas visible this time, making me think that springtime eggs and hatchlings must be near. Autumn and I spent a lot of time here practicing with the new Sony 300mm, and it just made for some astonishingly beautiful images. You might notice that around penguin colonies you'll see little brown trails, and the guides call these penguin highways. They're basically just hiking trails that the penguins establish to make it easier to move around the area in such deep snow. The afternoon brought one of the most magical experiences I've ever had in my life. The choppy seas turned to the softest, lightest snow I could imagine, surrounded by gorgeous icebergs, and just when I thought it couldn't be any better, we spotted a pod of humpback whales. These conditions were way too good to pass up, so we quickly loaded into Zodiacs for some legitimate Antarctic whale watching. As always, taking photo and video from the Zodiac was extremely tough, but these whales were close enough that we ended up just having an incredible amount of fun regardless. Our boat ride was full of every animal you can imagine, from the whales to a skua mating dance, and even Antarctic terns perched on the remains of the shipwreck Gouverneurin, an old whaling ship driven aground by its crew to save their own lives when it caught fire in 1915. I'm a big fan of whales, so personally, good riddance to that boat. Our favorite wildlife encounter of all was this lone chinstrap penguin hanging out on a small iceberg floating through the bay. The flurry of snowflakes combined with the brilliant colors of the ice made this a photographic highlight of the trip for me. Our final day in Antarctica was to be spent at Deception Island, an active volcano near the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. We began the day by sailing through Neptune's Bellows, an imposing pair of cliffs that mark the entrance to the caldera. Once inside, we transferred to land and spent the morning hiking around. It seems silly to go on a hike when there's such incredible wildlife to be seen nearby, but how often does one get to say they hiked inside the caldera of an active volcano in Antarctica? Back at the beach, we found an absolutely adorable seal who was determined to wiggle his way to the ocean. I'm sure it's hard work flopping along in the sand like this, so he had to pause a couple times to catch his breath, but after some hard work and perseverance, he finally reached the water and accomplished his goal, which was to lay there motionless and let the waves hit him in the face. You know, we all have our own desires and dreams in this world, and I'm just happy that his came true. Now, lest you forget that this is an active volcano, the sand is actually steaming from the heat of magma beneath our feet. This seems to be quite a treat for the local wildlife, as we had several gentoo and chinstrap penguins pop up for a stroll along the beach. Back on the ship, it was time for the polar plunge. I'm personally a huge adrenaline junkie with nearly everything under my belt, from backcountry skiing on glaciers to skydiving, but I've personally never understood the obsession people have with cold water. It just sucks. Like, it's cold. You don't have to do it. Nevertheless, this is a volcano in Antarctica, and it doesn't get much cooler than that. No pun intended. So after watching a few others jump in, Autumn and I made our way down the stairs and did our polar duty, followed by shots of vodka provided by the crew to warm back up. Very Russian of us. God, vodka is so gross.
No.
As we made our way back across the Drake Passage, I was left reminiscing on perhaps the single most incredible travel experience of my entire life. A location that had held the absolute #1 spot on my bucket list for more than a decade finally crossed off, yet somehow remained right at the top of the list. A destination so magnificent that a return trip here feels more important than a first visit to almost anywhere else on Earth. For someone like myself, a lover of wild places, pristine wilderness, and rugged landscapes untouched by human development, there is truly nowhere better. Thank you all so much for watching part 2 of my Antarctica video. I want to say a special thanks to Poseidon Expeditions for having me down. I never would have been able to get to Antarctica on my own. They were extremely gracious taking Autumn and I down there, and I am eternally grateful. If you're considering a trip to Antarctica, I cannot recommend the experience with Poseidon Expeditions enough. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.